Your wheels and tires are far more important than you think. They are the connection point between your vehicle and the terrain that you're trying to drive over. And without that vital link operating the way it should, you could find yourself losing traction, losing control, or even being stranded somewhere with a bad puncture or blowout. It is something you absolutely have to get right. Nicole and I recently embarked on a long shakedown trip with our Hilux that tested all kinds of different pressure points, and what we found was that while the general configuration of our new camper worked exactly the way we wanted it to, there were some shortcomings in the handling characteristics. We also had an unrepairable puncture en route to one of our campsites and really struggled to find a replacement anywhere for this brand and size. With a big trip to the Kalahari coming up, the decision was made. It was time for some changes. We'll be covering some of the suspension and brake upgrades on separate episodes, but today our focus is very much on the rims and tires. We'll start off by having everything fitted, we'll explain why we chose what we chose, and after that we'll be heading to the Continental factory to meet up with the guys from General Tyre, get a full training session and factory tour, and then finish up with a Q&A session where we'll be able to ask some of the burning questions about tires that you've always wanted to ask. I'll add chapters to this video in case you'd like to skip to anything specific, but let's get things started with the rims.
So, these are the rims that we're fitting. They're made by A-Line. I believe this design is called the Duke Satin Black. I think it looks pretty good. But it's not just about the look and the name and all that. There's two magic numbers here. The first is the number 17. These are 17-inch rims as opposed to the 18s that we had before. That does two things. It not only gives us the ability to go slightly low on our tire pressures. Smaller rim means there's more room for us to play around with pressures. But secondly, it also means that we're probably not going to struggle as much to find spares if we have to. But that's where we get to the second magic number, and that's the number 6. We have 6 sets of rims, and we're going to be fitting 6 tires on those rims, which means we will have 2 spares when we need 2 spares. On long trips, we'll carry one on the back of the camper, carry one at the bottom, and that way it's very unlikely that we'll need to try and find new spares in tiny towns in the middle of nowhere. So that's great. But yeah, next thing to do, we're going to go ahead to Best Drive, and we're going to go pick up a set of General Grabber ATXs. So something new, and I'm pretty excited to try them out.
It was sad to see the BFs go. These have served me well over the years and have done what they're designed to do, resist punctures on rough roads. However, with the rim diameter change, using my old tires was never an option, and that opened the door for me to try something new. And here's my choice. General Grabber ATX LT in 265/70 R17. You can see that the tread pattern is not that dissimilar to the BFs, and that's kind of the point. I wanted an aggressive, rugged all-terrain tire, and the ATXs offer exactly that, but with slightly better performance in sand and on wet roads. So a little bit more well-rounded. And the sand performance in particular was something that was very important to me, with many hundreds of kilometers of remote soft sand driving to be done over the following few weeks. General Grabbers are available in a couple different variants. The 83s are all-terrains but slightly less aggressive than the ATXs. They'll give you better grip on the road and a better fuel economy. The X3s are mud terrains that are very aggressive and rugged, a great choice for all the off-road driving that I do, but considering that I sometimes need to drive thousands of kilometers on tar and gravel to get to the 4x4 trails that I do, I eventually settled on the ATXs in light truck construction, which gives better support when carrying heavy loads and when running at low pressures. Here's a side-by-side comparison between old and new. The outer diameter is exactly the same on both, 31.6 inches, but you can see the difference that the smaller rim makes to the sidewall height. Looking at a spec sheet on tyresize.com, everything is basically the same except the sidewall that grows by 7.4%. This is something that would be appreciated on my upcoming Kalahari trip, when dropping pressures on the soft sand dunes and when cruising over rough corrugations. And remember, these 31.6 inch tires are already a size up from the factory size. Here's a comparison between the current grabbers and the factory tires that came from the dealership, with almost a 16% difference in sidewall height. With everything fitted, I have to say I'm very stoked with the way that this looks. And I should add, I did actually notice a softer ride right away, with fewer felt vibrations from the road. Whether this can be attributed to the smaller rims or the new tires, I'm not sure, but it's likely a little bit of both. Next up, we find ourselves on our way to Continental Tyres, which just happens to only be about a 15-minute drive from my house. We've been invited for a factory tour, and the best part is that this factory makes the general grabbers, so we get to watch how our own tires had been made from start to finish. Not many people get that opportunity. Just outside the main factory they have the Conti Academy, where dealers are invited to receive training on all the technical aspects of how tires work, what goes into the development and manufacturing process, and which specific design should be recommended for different applications. I was lucky enough to be given a proper education while I was here, and I found it extremely interesting and enlightening. We ran through some of the material science, construction procedures, a component breakdown, and a rundown of the quality control procedures that get put in place. Did you know, for example, that these tire factories have literally thousands of different rubber compounds, and that every single tire variant has different compounds in different ratios? I definitely have new respect for the engineers responsible for designing these tires. From here we got to go on a factory tour of this massive facility, and unfortunately we weren't allowed to bring cameras into the main factory floor, but I did get a chance to pick the brains of Ryan Visagie from General Tyres, and I'll leave this with you because this is a very interesting discussion to listen to. Hopefully you learned something new today.
Well, we are here at Continental in Port Elizabeth, which just happens to be literally 18 minutes from my house, which is amazing. And we've come here this morning, Nicole and I, to do a little bit of a factory tour, which has been a very enlightening experience, and also to chat to Ryan Visagie, who I will allow to introduce himself properly in a moment. But there's a bit of a backstory here. I was on my way to New Zealand last year. I think it was probably September, something like that, and felt a tap on my shoulder, and Ryan came and introduced himself. He'd seen some of my videos, and he explained, he works here at General Tyre / Continental, and explained what he does. And I've always been very curious about the whole process of how tires are made, but just the science behind tires in general, because there's actually so much more that goes into designing tread patterns and rubber compounds and everything than you would think. But anyway, long story short, a few months later, I'm now at a point where I've been looking at, tires to replace my old set, because firstly I wanted to switch from 18-inch to 17-inch rims, so then I'd have to buy a new set anyway. But secondly, you will have seen on my last trip, got a bad puncture and just struggled to find a replacement tire in that size. So ended up chatting to Ryan, getting very interested in the general grabber range of tires, and it's just been really interesting meeting and hearing information. So Ryan, you can introduce yourself and maybe just explain what you do here, and then I've got a bunch of questions that I want to ask personally that I always want to learn, but secondly I'm sure my audience will love to learn some stuff too. Awesome.
Yeah, Matt, so my name's Ryan Visagie, as you mentioned, and I'm Product Communications Manager here at Continental Tyre South Africa. I haven't been here since the beginning. Our company's 75 years old, so I know I'm coming close with grey, but not there yet. And yes, we produce locally Continental branded and General Tyre branded tyres in both SUV and 4x4. and then light truck, which we're going to talk about as well. So yes, it's been an interesting journey meeting you and also understanding your needs from a tyre perspective. But yeah, glad that you could visit and that it was interesting.
Yeah, it was amazing. We're obviously not allowed to film inside the factory because all this proprietary machinery and stuff like that. But I always had kind of a mental image. I know that tyres are more interesting than what meets the eye, but seeing the sheer number of processes and the sheer number of different rubber compounds and parts that it has to go through. I always thought, it's a piece of rubber that has a bead put in and, maybe some materials and then gets put into a mold and made. But it's actually a lot more that goes into it than that. So Continental / General Tyre has been here for 75 years here in Port Elizabeth. Can you tell me just briefly the history of General Tyre and Continental? It was explained to me that Continental bought out General Tyre.
That was in 2013.
2013. Okay, so fairly recent. Yeah. Okay.
So we originally, obviously, were a privately owned company, and we've been through a long history. Of course, producing for local original equipment manufacturers in South Africa, and we still do. We were wholly owned, or we are wholly owned now, bought out by Continental AG in 2013. So we are now officially owned as Continental Tyre South Africa, and we produce all the way up to 20-inch in 20-inch locally across both passenger, ultra high performance, and in 4x4. So we do make some bigger 4x4 sizes as well. I've been with the company for almost 10 years. It's been very interesting learning about the intricacies and the science that goes into to tyres. And they're a lot more complex because the demands on a tyre are a lot more than what you would think.
Yeah. And also, you don't get one tyre that does everything well. So you have everything from high-speed highway driving to low-range 4x4 and everything in between, and even just amongst the off-road tyres, every variant has different strengths and weaknesses, and if it's really good at this, it's impossible for it to be as good as something else.
Correct.
And so there's a lot of probably market research, but also engineering that has to go into finding the right tyre for the right market and all of that.
And that's why I think it's so critical to ask the right questions when you buy and tell the person that you're buying from what you do.
Yeah.
Because in that application, sometimes there's a blurry line on how much I do off-road, how much I do on-road. And if my Toyota Fortuner or whatever is for the school run only, that's going to be a very different tyre purchase to if you do what you do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people fall into the trap of just wanting a tyre that looks really good, and it's maybe not the best for what you actually need to do with it. Yeah. And the cool thing about what you guys are making here is not only is it very, very local to me, but it's like this factory is massive. I think they said it's about 1 kilometer from kind of the start to the finish. And I don't know how many people you employ here, but it's a lot. So buying a General Grabber, it's helping helping to pay salaries of local people as opposed to an imported tyre, which for me is very cool. Wanting to, I love this country and I want to do my bit. But let's get into a couple of questions. In your words, this is the very basics, but not everyone knows this. What's the difference between sort of highway tires, all-terrain tires, and mud-terrain tires, and how blurry are the lines between them? Because you can get a very mild all-terrain, you get a very aggressive all-terrain, but they all where do you draw the line between them? And is there any clear definition, or is it sort of how much on-road, how much off-road?
So let's take an example perhaps in a vehicle. So if we're talking about a typical ladder frame vehicle, a Ford Everest, Fortuner, Isuzu MUX, it would probably come out with a more highway pattern oriented design. And the simple reason for that is many of these vehicles are exported. The export market often has very strict regulations on noise, so noise pollution, and CO2 emissions, so rolling resistance targets. So that tyre would be a highway pattern. It would still need to meet the right load and speed index of that vehicle's capability. So In many cases, it would have an XL on the sidewall to denote that it can carry a higher load according to its gross vehicle mass and gross combination mass. Then, if you decide you want to go to an all-terrain tyre, like you said, you get mild all-terrain, you get aggressive all-terrain. And in pattern variations, you'd get a 50-50, you get an 80-20, and whatnot in between. So yes, from a highway pattern on that vehicle to a very mild all-terrain, be quite close in similarities. You would notice in perhaps a load rating being slightly higher or a speed rating being slightly lower if the tyre is more aggressive, and then the pattern.
Yeah.
And then of course within all-terrain you go all the way up to a Grabber 80X, which is quite an aggressive pattern, which would be slightly noisier in comparison to the highway pattern. Your fuel consumption wouldn't be as good, but the benefits it gives you in off-road would be massive.
Yeah.
And the peace of mind of not having a tyre that could potentially get cut or fail at low pressures. And then when you go all the way to a mud terrain, now you go extreme. So those people are typically the ones that drive 20% tar to get to the 80% off-road adventure. And that tyre is not designed to do a massive amount of tar driving. Reason for that, it's slightly more compromised in its ride quality that it will give you, fuel consumption, and a bit more noise. And the pattern is designed and the compound is designed to withhold that extensive off-road. So in the chip and chunk resistance that we spoke about earlier, it's not going to fall apart when it does thousands of kilometers of gravel.
And then let's segment into what a light truck specification tire is, because you can have two tires that I always kind of visually look at you can look at an aggressive tread and think, oh, that's a more heavily constructed tire, but there's actually so much more going on within the different layers and the thicknesses of different compounds and all of that. So what is a LT tire and why were they introduced, and when should someone look at getting a light truck tire versus a non-LT tire?
So LT as a phrase comes from light truck, and light truck is typically a designation that comes from the US market. The vehicles that they have in the US market are a lot bigger and heavier than the ones that we have here. So an LT tire was originally designed to carry an additional load. If you take, we have 1 ton buckies, they would have 1.5 or 2 ton or even bigger vehicles that are utility vehicles. So it's designed to carry more load. What does that mean in the construction? It means that the construction is more robust. There's more that goes into it. You've seen how the steel belts are thicker. There's additional rubber in the tread area and the shoulder pad for resistance against penetrations. Your bead would be thicker, your sidewall would be thicker. So what does that mean in material? You're going to, from the same size in a non-LT to an LT, you're going to carry possibly up to 4 kilograms in additional material. So your tire is heavier. The benefit off-road is that tire is more resistant to penetrations. It's easier to, now you have a heavier vehicle. You would need an LT because it can carry more load. At the same time as when you reduce your pressures to run off-road for comfort and stability, you won't get as much deflection in the sidewall, which is that exposure to sharp objects. So that's where an LT that was originally designed for US market is a benefit in the 4x4 sense for South Africans.
Yeah. So I think another question a lot of people have is, when is it worth it for me to upgrade my tires? So, for example, when I bought my bucky from the dealership, it had a certain set of tires fitted, and there's a good reason that those are fitted. I know, for example, that not everyone who buys a 4x4 bucky is going to go off-road often. They might just, drive it around town, and in that case, it would be the wrong decision to get a aggressive all-terrain tire. But for me, having added all this load and going more off-road, LT tire makes so much more sense. But maybe that's something we can use to explain what sort of what reasons, aside from the fact that some people might not need it, would the vehicle manufacturers choose certain tires? Is it to meet emission standards? Is it to be able to advertise better fuel economies? Or is it just just to save money?
It is essentially that. I think those are the most important reasons. It's noise and it's fuel economy. Environmental impact of CO2 emissions has driven the manufacturer in that direction. So a lower rolling resistance tyre will then benefit in that sense, because the CO2 emissions will be lower as an outcome of the fuel economy saving. And then in addition to that is the noise. In some markets where those vehicles are sold, noise regulations are very strict, and it's drive-by noise, it's not cabin noise. So you would have a vehicle drive past a microphone and it would register a number of decibels. That's pass or fail. And a tyre is going to definitely help you with that. So a more aggressive pattern will be a noisier drive-by test. So it depends on where the vehicle is exported to, if it's produced here. And very definitely what you say is, if you do the school run only, remember that tyre is designed to showcase the capability of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So in its performance, in its ride and handling, its wet performance, fuel economy, all of that. I think it's important that if you deviate from that tyre onto something more aggressive, you have to understand that the vehicle capability would reduce in certain areas.
Yes.
It wouldn't be able to necessarily stop in exactly that distance. It might be slightly longer because you have a more aggressive pattern. So you've got less contact of rubber on the surface. So there are a number of elements, and then we'll talk about overall diameter just now, but that's another one. Because if you increase your overall diameter, think about your gearing,
Yes.
your speedo reading. The error in your speedo reading suddenly now corrects, or maybe even overcorrects. So you have to consider that in your decision. But ultimately, it is your decision. If you have a vehicle that you want to modify, and you want to lift the suspension, and you want to do all sorts of things, it's your decision, but you have to understand the impact of that.
My next question is around tyre pressures, and I know this isn't an exact science because every vehicle's weight is a bit different, and it's hard sometimes to even know exactly what your vehicle weighs, and then you've got the rear might be slightly different to the front, and it might depend on your rim diameter and all that stuff. But this is something that I think a lot of people have a basic understanding of, but there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how do you determine what pressures you should drop down to for certain applications. I'm not going to ask you for answers to that because obviously you won't be able to give them, but I have a question about how tire pressures affect the profile of your sidewall as well, and whether I've heard people say, for example, they were going down Van Sales Pass in Namibia and they chose to keep their tires a bit hard at slightly harder pressures to protect their sidewalls from if it's sticking out a bit and a rock hits it from the side. When do you, as far as low range 4x4 driving, what's the benefits of reducing your pressure, and are there any benefits of keeping your pressures a bit harder, or what would your advice be there?
Okay, so I think let's just start off with the OEM manufacturer recommends pressures for that vehicle with the original tires that it is fitted with. And that's typically inside your door or in your engine bay. So that's a good guide of pressure loaded and unloaded. Okay. In the context of 4x4 and low range 4x4, let's say you are on a trip and you are loaded. You have to bear that in mind, is even though I've got a more robust tire, I still have to bear in mind that I can't drop it too far because I'm carrying a load. Okay. So that's the first principle. The second one is in the deflection of your sidewall. Yes, even a Grabber X3, a 3-ply mud terrain, when you deflate it, you will see that deflection in the sidewall. However, it will be less with a tire of that construction than a tire, for example, like a standard construction 83. A light truck will give you less deflection because it's designed to keep its profile, its contour, the integrity of its contour better than a highway pattern would. A highway pattern is principally designed that the air pressure must carry the load of the vehicle. Okay. And then when you take the air pressure out, it can no longer carry the load, and you will have quite a big deflection, which is exposure on the sidewall area.
Yeah.
So that's not really ideal for off-road, or not too far off-road. An LT tire, I would say, I couldn't give you an absolute, because it depends on the mass of your vehicle and where you are going.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of sharp rock, people's perception is sometimes to go too hard. And remember the principle of the balloon.
Yeah.
If you blow a balloon up that it's very, very hard, then it doesn't take much, with your nail you could pop it. And the principle of that versus a soft balloon, where if the balloon is very soft, you can kind of stick your nail into it, it won't necessarily pop because there's more give.
Yeah.
So I would say on a descent, like a Van Zyls descent, it's very technical. There's a lot of sharp rock. You have to be careful of your lines, but I would say that's where you need to balance. I wouldn't go too hard, but I wouldn't go too soft.
Yeah.
So if you normally run on high speed gravel at, let's say you run at 1.8 bar, quite heavily loaded, you're doing 50, 60, 70 k an hour on gravel, on a good gravel road. If you're going to hit Van Zyls, I would say, you maybe want to go up slightly.
Okay.
1.9, 2 bar. But I wouldn't say now you need to go to 2.6 bar because you're worried about rock and you're worried about your contour. If you are going slowly enough, a tire like that will still roll over. There's enough give in the tire because the pressure is not too hard that it will roll over objects as long as you've chosen the right line. But in some cases you can't avoid sharp rocks or stones. All I'd say is you walk the path. If you see anything like that, try move it out the way. If you're going to roll right over that, because you don't want the risk that it could penetrate.
Yeah. And how much does rim size play into that equation? Because let's say you're in a Land Rover with a 20-inch rim and you don't have much to play with, you're obviously going to want to try and run heavier, more higher pressure, or because that's something I have with 18-inch rims and now going down to 17. It's just nice to know that I've got a little bit more to play with there if I have to. But
again, so it's about the volume of air. So your overall diameter from a 16 to a 20 might not change, or negligible, but the amount of profile of side contour you have is less. So you have to, yes, absolutely. If you deflate, you don't have that balloon effect as much as you would with your tire. So and you would compromise on the integrity of the tire. So a bigger 20-inch, 21-inch off-road, that's not really where it's going to cut its teeth. Certainly you want to be in a 16 or 17-inch if you're doing lots of technical 4x4.
Yeah, I just want to add that when I was in Botswana and had to try and find spare in Maun, which is one of the bigger towns there, I couldn't. They said to me, if you had a 16 or 17 inch, I could. There's lots available. With the 18 and bigger, sorry, we don't have much. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to go to a smaller rim size, and it's definitely something you should keep in mind if you're choosing a vehicle or a tire set that you want to take somewhere remote, is availability. It's not just about how it performs, it's about if you have to buy a spare somewhere, where are you actually going to be able to get it? So I wanted to go just one size up from factory. I didn't want to go up to a 33 because then you have to re-gear, and the vehicle is geared for the tire size that it comes with, and if you change that too dramatically, then it's not going to perform properly. True. But the one size up for me gave me just a little bit of extra clearance that has helped, but then you might struggle to find the right tire size. So there's definitely a balance there. You should maybe do some research, go to a local tire shop, ask, what sizes are available for this rim size everywhere, and make a decision based on that. I think I've got only one more question here, and that is, I've heard some people say that narrower tires perform better on sand because there's a bit less rolling resistance. Any advice there for soft sand?
So with sand, it's all about the tire footprint. Okay, and that's critical. And we did an experiment a while ago where we went from a 2-bar pressure and we measured the tire footprint static to 1.2 and then to 0.5. And at 2 bar, it was about 280 mils of footprint. Remember, that's length, not the width of the tire. It went from 280 mils to 300, so only 20 mil increase going from 2 bar to 1.2 bar. But then it went from 300 to 400 mils, from 1.2 to 0.5. So there was an exponential growth in the footprint.
Yeah.
That is what you need in soft sand, is you want that additional traction. And the longer your footprint is, the better it's going to be to get out of sand. So I would say, even a slightly wider tire in sand is better. And you'll even get people on a stock standard highway pattern tire or an SUV tire that will be quite capable in sand at lower pressures. The key here is speed and load. Okay, so if you look at your speed and load rating, and even if in sand, if you are increasing your speed and you're running a tire like that, it can debead, it can come off the rim because it's not designed. And if you take that principle of speed and load, you also see that the heavier a tire is, so a mud terrain, will have a much lower speed rating. So typically a Q rated tire, 140, 150, 160 k an hour will be its limit, but its load index will be much higher. So you can carry a much higher load, 1,500 kilos typically per wheel. So you have to bear that in mind. I think that's an important principle, because soft sand, people are, you need momentum.
Yes.
And if you're in like an SUV or an all-wheel drive vehicle on a highway pattern tire, and you apply a lot of the speed at low pressures, you can have that tire come off the rim.
All very interesting. Once again, thank you so much, not only for inviting me here, but just to all the guys here for taking me through the whole factory tour, and even just running me through some educational content on the science and the thoughts behind tire construction. It's very, very interesting. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Ryan.
Awesome.
And
Matt, thanks a lot. Good to have you.
Awesome.
Cheers.